Hi everybody. Today we take up a new topic under accounting for leases under IFRS 16 or IND AS 116. We've already covered lease identification, recognition, measurement and remeasurement. Today we take up the topic of lease modification. What is lease modification? It is accounting for changes to the original terms and conditions of the contract. Doesn't this sound familiar? Lease modification sounds like an identical twin of lease remeasurement, but no. These two concepts are more like fraternal twins. They sound similar, but they are quite different. I will cover more details on this in today's video. This is part 1 of 3 videos on lease modification. In part 1, I will be covering the concept and accounting treatment relating to lease modification. In the next video, I will take up a simple solved example, and in my third video, I'll take a more complex solved accounting example which will help you to understand this topic better. Alright, let's get started. What is lease modification? Let us understand with an example. Now, let us say this is the original scope of the lease. That is, the lessee has leased these 3 buildings and they have agreed to this consideration. So now a few years after the date of the commencement, the lessee decides that it does not really need 3 buildings. It needs only 2. So the lessor and lessee agree to reduce the scope by 1 building. Accordingly, they also agree on a reduced consideration. Now, this change in the original scope or consideration of a lease is known as a lease modification. Let's look at some examples of a lease modification. First one, if the lessee decides to surrender some of the floors that he or she has leased in a building. If they decide to take additional floors of the same building. If they decide to change the annual fixed lease payments, or change the timing of the payments, like instead of at the end of the year, they decide to pay at the beginning of the year. Another example is relating to modifying the original lease term. It could either be extending the lease term or terminating the lease term early. Wait, these two, the extension of the lease term or termination of the lease term, that sounds familiar, right? It is exactly the same as the 2 conditions that we considered under lease remeasurement. So, is there a clash in the conditions? No. There's one very important difference. Although terminating the lease term early or extending the lease term are present in both the options, the most important consideration is whether these were a part of the original contract or not. So, in case of a lease remeasurement, the lessee's option to either terminate the contract early or extend the contract would be a part of the original contract. But under lease modification, the contract would be silent on any option to extend or terminate the lease. I hope you have understood the concept of lease modification as well as the difference between lease remeasurement and lease modification. Now let's go to the accounting treatment. The accounting treatment under these 2 concepts are slightly similar, so please be careful to assess correctly whether a particular change involves merely a change in assumptions that were made at the beginning of the contract or whether it is a change in the original scope or consideration of the contract. Right? Okay, so we go to the accounting treatment. You have assessed that a particular change is indeed a lease modification. The next step that you do is assess if the contract is still a lease. If it is not a lease, then it is outside the scope of IFRS 16 and nothing that I discuss now will be applicable to it. Yes, it is still a lease. Then what do you check? You check if there has been an increase in the scope. For example, earlier we said that the lessee decided to reduce one of the buildings. Let's say the lessee decides to add a new building to the original scope of the lease. This would consider as an increase in scope. So if there is an increase in scope, what do you check? You check if the increase in consideration relating to the lease is commensurate with the standalone price of the right of use of that additional building. If yes, then you cannot club the lease of this additional building with the existing lease. You will need to recognize it as a separate lease. Now let us say there is no increase in scope. It is a completely different kind of lease modification. In that case, there are other conditions that you need to assess, which we will discuss in the next slide. Similarly, if you find that the increase in consideration is not commensurate with the standalone price, then also we look at the other conditions that you need to assess. If it is not an increase in scope, is it a decrease in scope or lease term? If it is a decrease in scope or the lease term, then the accounting treatment is you reduce the lease liability and the ROU asset proportionately, and the difference is to be taken to the P&L account. Let us say it is any kind of modification other than either an increase in scope or a decrease in scope or lease term. Then you remeasure the lease liability using the revised discounting rate, and the adjustment is to be made to the ROU asset. This is where I said the accounting treatment is similar to that of the lease remeasurement. That brings us to the end of this video. It is a very short video. I hope you understood the concept of lease modification. The accounting treatment may seem to be slightly complicated because we only discussed the theory. When we solve examples, it will become more clear to you. In my upcoming videos, I will be doing a simple solved example and a more complex one, right? So as always, all your comments, queries, suggestions for improvements are very welcome. I hope you found this video helpful. Bye.